Hey, it's T. I'm one of the geniuses at Ask Zylor. So let's just get started with the live session.
So the first question is dealing with a grade 9 math question. So all these questions are questions we see throughout the week, are questions that students have been sending in. So this is a grade 9 math question. It's asking us to plot using the slope and y-intercept for this equation. So we have 2x plus 5y plus 10 is equal to 0. So the first step we should do is turn this into the slope y-intercept form. Right? So we're going to isolate for the y. So we have 5y is equal to, we bring the other two terms to the other side, so we have negative 2x minus 10. Then we're going to divide both sides by 5, which gives us negative 2x over 5 minus 10 over 5, and that can be simplified to negative 2x over 5 minus 2. So now this is the slope y-intercept form, right? The slope will be the coefficient of x, so this is my slope, and this is my y-intercept, right? So if we're asked to plot this, I know my y-intercept is negative 2, and the negative 2, 5 tells me the rise and the run, so my slope is negative 2 over 5. So I know what the rise and the run is, so if the run is 5 and the rise is negative 2, that means for every 5 values I move to the right, I'm going to go down by 2. Right? So if this is 0, this ends up being 5, this ends up being negative 4. I'm going to go from here downwards. Right? The next run would be at 10. I'm going to go even further down to negative 6. And so on. Right? It just keeps extending. So this is a grade 12 advanced functions question. It's dealing with plotting sinusoidal functions. It's asking us to determine the range, domain and range, min, max, period, and amplitude of the function, and draw 2 cycles. So let's go ahead and evaluate the domain. So the domain for this should be all real numbers. Right. So the domain will be x is an element of all real numbers. The range we'll find out when we understand what the amplitude and the equation of axis is. So let's go ahead and find the min-max. First, the period and the amplitude. So we're given the function f of x, 3 sine x minus 5 pi over 6. Okay, so the 3 tells me the amplitude straight away. So it's going to give me the amplitude of 3. Right? There's no d value, meaning there's no number that's multiplying into the x. So my d value will be just 1. So I can find my period because my period is 2 pi over my d value. So my period will just be 2 pi. Now I have a phase shift because if I'm adding or subtracting something to the x, that means I have a phase shift. So my phase shift is going to be 5 pi over 6. Right? Is it left or right? This minus sign tells me it has to be 5 pi over 6 to the right. So I have a phase shift of 5 pi over 6 to the right. Okay? And there's no number adding at the end, meaning there's no c value. So that tells me my equation of axis is just y is equal to 0. So if my c value is 0, that means my amplitude is going to be going upwards by 3 and downwards by 3. So I can find the max and min. So my max will be 3, my min will be negative 3. Okay, so let's go ahead and plot a general equation for this. So this is a sine function, meaning I'm going to start at 0. And if my period is 2 pi, my middle is pi, I have pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. These are the important points. So the max will be at pi over 2, which will be at 3. And then it's going to come back down to 0 at pi. And the min will be negative 3. It'll be at 3 pi over 2. So I have something like this. Right? So this is not accounting for the phase shift. Right? Phase shift meaning I'm moving my entire function 5 pi over 6 to the right. So let's go ahead and draw what that looks like. So if this is 5 pi over 6, I'm going to start there because this has been shifted 5 pi over 6 to the right. So I'm going to start at 5 pi over 6, and then my period is still 2 pi. So I can find when my period ends by adding 5 pi over 6 plus 2 pi, which gives me 17 pi over 6. So my period will end at 17 pi over 6. Right. I can find the halfway points as well by adding pi to 5 pi over 6, which should be 11 pi over 6. And I can add pi over 2 to 5 pi over 6 to get 8 pi over 6. So all these are relevant because I know that the maximum should be between 5 pi over 6 and 11 pi over 6. So that will be 3. And the minimum will be between 11 pi over 6 and 17 pi over 6. So it will be negative 3. I can find out the in between again by adding pi over 2 to the 11 pi over 6. So I end up with something like this. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So this is very similar to what we did before, but in this case we're dealing with plotting using intercepts instead of the slope y-intercept. So we're asked to find the x and y intercept of these functions. I'm just going to do 3a. So it's 2x plus 3y is equal to 12. So I need to find the x-intercept and the y-intercept. So the x-intercept, if I look at a graph, the x-intercept happens when my y value is 0. Right? So I'm just going to plug in 0 for the y to figure out what the x-intercept is. So 2x plus 3 times 0 is equal to 12. So 2x is equal to 12, and then divide both sides by 2 to give me x is equal to 6. So that's my x-intercept. So to find my y-intercept, I'm going to plug in x is equal to 0. Again, if I look at when is my line crossing the y-axis, it's when my x value is 0, so I'm going to plug in 0 for my x. So 2 times 0 plus 3y is equal to 12. Then I have 3y is equal to 12, divide both sides by 3, I get y is equal to 4. So I have an x-intercept of 6 and a y-intercept of 4. So my x-intercept means I have a point 6 and 0, and my y-intercept means I have a point 0 and 4. Right? So if I were to plot this, I have 6 and 0, so let's say somewhere here, 0 and 4, let's say is here. That tells me I just need to connect the two dots to give me a line. So that's how I plot using the x and y intercepts. So let's go ahead to the next question. So this is dealing with the rate of change. It's still a grade 9 question. So it's telling me the school is getting solar panels installed on the roof of the school. The company charges the school a flat fee plus a charge per panel. The total cost of $14,495 for 60 solar panels, and the total cost of $17,870 for 75 solar panels. They asked me to find the charge per panel and determine the flat fee. So the total cost is equal to the flat fee plus the charge per panel times how many panels you have. Okay, so if I were to find what's the charge per panel, I need to find the slope essentially, right? I'm given 2 points. My 2 points are 60 solar panels, and the total cost is $14,495, and the other point is 75 solar panels, and the total cost is $17,870. So these are the 2 points I can use to find my slope. So my slope ends up being y2 minus y1, so I can do 17,870 minus 14,495 divided over x2 minus x1, so it's going to be 75 minus 60. So if I do the math for this in the calculator, I end up getting $225 per panel. So that's my charge per panel. The next part is asking what is the flat phi? So I have the slope. I can come up with an equation essentially. So I can say y is equal to 225, x, I can say x is how many panels, and y is total cost, right? Plus b will be my flat fee. Right. So in order to find b, I can plug in one of the points I had initially. So I can plug in 14,495 times 225 multiplied by 60 plus my b, and my b will evaluate to 995. So my flat fee will be $995. Okay, so my part C is asking, the school decides to go with 95 solar panels, what's the total cost? So now I have an equation that's going to model the total cost and how many panels I want. So plus 995, and x is how many panels, so I'm just going to plug in 95 into my x to find out my total cost. So this will evaluate to 22,370. So the next question is a grade 12 advanced functions, so it's dealing with radians and angular velocity. So it's telling us a tire with a diameter of 38 centimeters rotates 10 times in 5 seconds. What's the angle that the tire rotates through in radians from 0 to 5 seconds? So we know it rotates 10 times in 5 seconds, so they ask me the angle it rotates through in that period of time. So we know one full circle is 2 pi, right? It's saying it's rotating 10 times. So to find the angle for part A, I'm going to do 2 pi times 10. That's going to tell me what the total angle is, so it ends up being 20 pi. Right. Part B is saying determine the angular velocity of the tire. So angular velocity is equal to the angle divided by the time. So the angle in this case is 20 pi, and the time is 5 seconds. I'm going to put in 5. So that gives me 20 over 5 will give me 4 pi radians per second. Okay, and then part C is saying determine the distance traveled by a pebble that is trapped in the tread of the tire. So determine the distance traveled, we can assume it's the distance traveled in the first 5 seconds. Okay, so we know the angle, and we're trying to find the arc length essentially. Arc length divided by radius. So my arc length, if I isolate for that, will be the angle times my radius. They've given me the diameter, so I just need to divide that by 2. So I do 38 over 2 as my radius, and my angle is going to be 20 pi. Right? If I plug this into my calculator, I end up with .19 centimeters. Oh, sorry, it's 1,194 centimeters. That makes a lot more sense. Okay, so what we did here is we're dealing with radians and angular velocity. So it's the angle that the tire rotates in 0 to 5 seconds. So it's telling us the angle the tire rotates 10 times, so it's completing 10 full revolutions. So we know each revolution is 2 pi, so we're going to multiply 2 pi by 10. So the total angle is going to be 20 pi. The next is asking us to determine the angular velocity of the tire. The angular velocity will be the angle divided by the time, and the angle we calculated earlier was 20 pi, and we know the time is 5 seconds. So we're going to do 20 pi over 5 seconds to give me 4 pi radians per second. And finally, part C was saying determine the distance traveled by a pebble that's trapped in the tread of the tire. So our assumption is that it's asking for the first 5 seconds, how far is it traveling? So they're asking us in terms of a distance, so not an angle, a distance. So we need to find the arc length. So the arc length equation is equal to arc length over radius. And the radius they've given us was the 38/2 because they give us the diameter. So then we know the angle is 20 pi, so we multiply 20 pi by 38/2 to give me 1,194 centimeters. So this is a grade 9 math question. I'll be doing part 2. So it's saying isolate for R1. So I have 1 over RT is equal to 1 over R1 plus 1 over R2. Okay, so what we can do is we can move the 1 over R2 to the other side, which gives me 1 over RT minus 1 over R2 is equal to 1 over R1. Next step is I have these two terms. I'm going to find the common denominators, so I'm going to multiply the left side by R2 minus I'm going to multiply the right side by RT to give me RT times R2 is equal to 1 over R1. Okay, so at this point we can just do cross multiplication. So we can bring R1 to the top. So I have R1 is equal to, I bring the denominator to the top on the other side, so I have RT times R2, and then bring the numerator to the bottom on the other side, so I have R2 minus RT. So that's what I end up with. So this is a grade 12 advanced functions question. It's dealing with long division of polynomials. So we have 2x cubed minus 7x squared minus 7x plus 5. This is being divided by 2x minus 1. Okay. So when we do long division, we end up looking for the first term of my binomial to match the first term of my polynomial, right? So we need to multiply the binomial by something to get the first term of my polynomial. So the only term that's missing from my first term in the binomial is an x squared, so I'm going to multiply the binomial by x squared. This gives me 2x cubed minus 1 times x squared is minus x squared. And then my next step is to subtract the top from the bottom, so I have 2x squared minus 2x squared should give me 0. So that's the goal. I need to try and eliminate the first term in every step of my long division. So then I have minus 7x squared minus x squared gives me minus 6x squared. Then I'm going to bring down one of the terms, the next term, so I have minus 7x. So my next step will be to match 2x to negative 6x squared. So I need to multiply it by negative 3x. Okay, negative 3x times 2x will give me negative 6x squared, and then negative 3x times negative 1 will give me plus 3x. Then I'm again going to subtract the 2, which gives me 0 minus 10x. Again, I'm bringing down the next term in my polynomial, which is plus 5, and then I'm going to try and match the 2x and the negative 10x. So I need to multiply the 2x by negative 5 to give me negative 10x. So negative 5 times 2x, negative 10x, negative 5 times negative 1 will be plus 5. If I subtract these two, I should get a remainder of 0. So my quotient ends up being x squared minus 3x minus 5, and my remainder will be 0. So this is a grade 11 functions trig question. So it's saying a point lies on the terminal arm of an angle in standard position. What's the value of the principal angle to the nearest degree? Okay. So let's go ahead and draw a brief sketch of where this point is. So we have 1 and negative 3. So this is 1, negative 3. So we have a terminal arm over there. So the principal angle will be the angle that's starting from quadrant 1 and going towards the terminal arm. So this entire angle will be theta. Okay, we have to find the value of this angle essentially. Right? So let's draw a triangle using the terminal arm. Right? We know this is going to be 3, it's going to be -3, and this is going to be 1. This will be my related acute angle. Okay, so if I were to find tan of the related acute angle, let's just keep this as 3. So my opposite, tan would be opposite of adjacent, so then I had opposite of 3 and adjacent of 1. So my tan would be 3 over 1. So if I were to find the related acute, I need to find the tan inverse on both sides. So the tan inverse of 3 would end up being 71.6 degrees. Right? But we need to understand that it's this angle right here. What they're asking for is the principal acute angle. So how do I find the principal acute angle? I'm going to do 360 degrees minus 71.6 degrees. Okay, so that's going to give me an angle of 288.4 degrees. This is my principal angle, and I get that from my related acute angle. So let's move on to the next question. So this is a grade 10 math question. It's dealing with linear systems. So they're telling us to determine the value of k if there's 3 points and some of the variables are replaced with the k variable. So y and z have k instead of an x value. What we're told that the 3 points are collinear. Collinear means that the 3 points all line within the same linear line. Okay, so what can we do with these 3 points is we can find the slope of x and y, and we can find the slope between x and z. Let's go ahead and do that. So between x and y, we have 8 minus 2, y2 minus y1, and x2 minus x1 will be k minus 3. Okay, so let's find the slope for the the x and z now. So it's going to be 29 minus 2, and then k plus 7 minus 3. So this I can simplify to 29 minus 2 over k plus 4. The reason we found the slope is because the 3 points are collinear, meaning they're in the same line. So that means the slope from these 3 points have to be the same. So slope 1, let's call this slope 1, slope 2, so slope 1 has to equal slope 2. So what I can do is make these fractions equal to each other. So 8 minus 2, I can simplify that to just 6. So I have 6 over k minus 3. And then 29 minus 2 is 27 over k plus 4. Okay, so now I have one equation with one unknown variable, which is my k. Now I can go ahead and solve this. Right? So I can multiply both sides by k minus 3 to get rid of the denominator on my left side. So I get 27 times k minus 3. This is still over k plus 4. And then I can multiply both sides by k plus 4 to get rid of the denominator on my right side. So I have 6 times k plus 4 is equal to 27 k minus 3. It's basically the cross multiplication method. Right? So then I have 6k plus 24 is equal to 27k minus 3 times 27 is 81. Then I can get the k's to one side, the numbers to one side. I get 27k minus 6k, 24 plus 81. So then I get k is equal to 105 over 21, which ends up being just 5. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. So this is a grade 12 advanced functions question. It's dealing with exponential equations and logs. So we're told the thermometer is brought from outside where the air temperature is negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit into a room where the air temperature is a constant 70 degrees. After 1 minute inside the room, the thermometer reads 0 degrees Fahrenheit. How long will it take the thermometer to read 60 degrees Fahrenheit? So we have to use the T of T is equal to T fin plus T inside minus T fin EKT. So the first goal should be to find out what this K variable is. Okay, so we're told that the T final or T fin is 70, the T outside is negative 20. So I can go ahead and plug those inside. So T of 60 is going to be 0, right? So I'm going to substitute the T of 60 with 0, and T fin is, I said, was 70, so I'm going to write down 70 plus T inside was negative 20 minus 70, which was T out to the T fin, right, the final, and then EKT. Right. The T is 60, so I'm going to replace the T with 60. Now I have an equation that I can solve for K with. Right. So I can bring 70 to the other side, which gives me negative 70. Negative 20 minus negative 70 gives me negative 90. EK60. Right. So then I have E60K is equal to, I divide both sides by negative 90 to give me 7 over 9. Right. Then I can convert this into a log equation, which would be log of E7 over 9 would give me 60K. Right. Then I can evaluate what log E79 is, and then multiply both sides by negative 1 over 60. So I have an equation for K now. Right. So what I can then do is, they're asking me, if I go back to the question, how long will it take the thermometer to read 60 degrees Fahrenheit? That means my T of T would be 60. I need to find out what the time is now. Right. So I'm going to say T of T would equal to 60. So I'm going to replace the initial equation I was given with 60 is equal to 70 plus negative 20 minus 70 ET over 60. Right. So what I'm going to replace the K with is what I have over here, what I found. Okay, so T times K, I'm going to replace my K with my equation I have there. So then I'm going to write this to be 60, 70 minus 90. Right. And then T over 60 times log of E of, I can rewrite the log of E as just ln, right? Ln of 7 over 9. So then I can again do simplify this equation. So 60 minus 70, I have negative 10 is equal to negative 90. I can bring the negative 90 to the other side, so I have negative 90 is equal to T over 60 times ln of 7 over 9. This one evaluates to 1 over 9 is equal to E T over 60 ln 7 over 9. And then I can find the ln of both sides, right? So the ln of 1 over 9 is equal to the ln, if I take the ln of e to the power of anything, I just get the exponent, so it's just T over 60 times ln of 7 over 9. Right? So then I can isolate for my T value, so T is equal to ln 1 over 9 times 60 over ln 7 over 9. So this will evaluate to 525 seconds. Okay, this is a bit complicated because they gave us an equation that we didn't have all the information for, so we had to use the information given to find one of the variables. So the equation given was this, that dealt with the final temperature, but they didn't tell us what K was. So based on the information given, we went ahead and found what K was, which was this term, and then we can use that to find out what the T is when it's 60 degrees outside. Right? So we plugged in the equation for K, and then we isolated for my T value, and I'm basically simplifying using the log laws to find that T is equal to 525 seconds. Okay, so there's a grade 12 advanced functions question. It's dealing with simplifying trig equations. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and rewrite this. 1 over cos squared x, 1 minus cos squared x. Okay, so what I can do for this is I'm going to replace the denominator with sine squared x. So I'm left with 1 minus 1 over cos squared x over sine squared x. The next thing I can do is evaluate the top by doing the common denominator. So I have cos squared x minus 1 over cos squared x. All this is still being divided by my denominator of sine squared x. Right? Cos squared x minus 1, I can simplify that to be 1 minus sine squared x. Right? So I can replace 1 minus sine squared x still over cos squared x, and all of this is still divided by sine squared x. Okay, the one thing, sorry, this should not be here, because when I do cos squared x, I'm only getting rid of the cos squared x, right? So when I introduce this 1 minus sine squared x, I have minus 1 plus 1, that evaluates to just 0. So now I have sine squared x over cos x over sine squared x. So these two terms can be cancelled out because they're being divided, right? This gives me 1 over cos squared x. Sorry, 1 minus 1, because this is a minus sign. So I'm just going to do this again just to show the steps more clearly. Okay, so my first step was I'm going to replace the denominator with sine squared x, right? And then I had this term, and then I went ahead and did common denominator for the numerator, which left me with cos squared x minus 1 over cos squared x over all that over sine squared x. Then I'm going to replace the cos squared x with sine 1 minus sine squared x, right? That gives me 1 minus sine squared x minus 1 over cos squared x, all this divided by sine squared x. 1 minus 1 ends up being 0, so I have negative sine squared x over cos squared x divided by sine squared x. Right? The division can turn into a multiplication, so I can just cancel out. So times 1 over sine squared x. So I can cancel these two terms out, which gives me negative 1 over cos squared x. So we're changing the denominator to sine squared x just to simplify it and get one term instead of two. If I didn't change it to sine squared x, I have 1 minus cos squared x. And if I didn't convert it to sine squared x initially, I would have to do it later on, because then I have a sine squared x in the numerator, which I can cancel out. So the goal should be to get as minimum number of terms as possible. So that's why we're going to try and get everything into one term.